So I'm back again. I hope you had time to look at the board and to see that I'm continuing with direct and indirect objects, but I'm looking at something a little bit different. Once again, let me put object pronouns, excuse me. Let me just put, here I have me, te, nos. These can be direct or indirect, so you really don't have to worry about it. But then this is lo, la, los, las. Those are direct. And then le and les, those are indirect. Okay, so here we have, for example, we have here le bi, ila bi. Now, la is direct, and le is, I'm going to put this down for a second. Le is, excuse me, le is indirect object pronoun, and la is direct object pronoun, and then we have lo bi. In certain versions of Spanish, not all versions of Spanish, but in certain versions of Spanish, if the object of the verb, is male, singular, and human, it really doesn't matter which verb it is. It doesn't matter whether the verb takes a direct or indirect object. If the object of the verb or the action is male, singular, and human, you automatically put the indirect object le. But that only applies singular, male, human. If the the object of the verb is female, then you put, if it's a direct object, then you put the direct object, la. If it's an indirect object, then you put the indirect object, le. Right? But if it's male, singular, and human, whether the verb normally takes a direct object or indirect object, it's always le. But that's only in certain versions of Spanish, especially Spanish from Latin America. But for example, in Colombia, that wouldn't be the case. In Colombia, they would use the direct object. Lo bi can be translated in Latin America. If those countries that do not follow that rule, lo bi could either be translated as I saw him, because the verb ver takes the direct object, I saw him, or I saw it, and it being something masculine or something unknown. In those countries that take that if it's male, singular, and human, and the object must be indirect, lo bi could only mean I saw it. Okay, here's another example. Now, the verb decir, and this is the past, the pretérito of the verb decir, dijiste. This is le dijiste. You told him, you told her, or you told, well, that's it, because you couldn't say you told you. It wouldn't make any sense. So you told him or you told her, because the verb decir takes the indirect object. Lo dijiste can only mean you told it, right? Or la dijiste, you told it being feminine. Okay, now I'm going back to the rule which says that in certain parts of Latin America and in certain parts of Spain, if the object of the verb is singular, male, and human, it doesn't matter which verb it is, you have le, right? But notice I keep saying masculine, singular, and human. Because if it's masculine, plural, and human, it's not les. If the verb normally takes the direct object, it's los. So, le bi I saw him, but los vi, I saw them. Interesting. It's only when it's singular. Okay. Another rule, once again, this depends on what part of the Spanish-speaking world, of which part you're speaking, right? Look at the difference. Lo espera su hijo, le espera un problema grande. Now there's a difference, because what's waiting here is not the same thing that's waiting here. So here, what's waiting is his son is waiting for him, right? If the subject is human or animate, if the subject is human or animate, and the object is, well, it doesn't matter what the object is, right? But if the subject is human or animate, and the verb normally takes the direct object, then the direct object is used. Lo espera su hijo. Because su hijo is the person that's waiting for him. But, if the subject is inanimate, if it's a thing, if it's not a human being, and the verb normally takes the direct object, because the subject is inanimate, the verb will take the indirect object. Le espera un problema grande. And the reason you have le instead of lo, not because of what le and lo represents, but because the subject, one is inanimate, un problema grande, and the other is animate or alive or human, su hijo. Now, I think one thing about direct and indirect objects in Spanish that is sort of confusing for us English speakers is that, first of all these different rules. If it's this or if it's that, and we're going to look at a video in which if you use the direct object, the verb has one meaning. I'm not talking about me, te, and nos. I'm only talking about lo, la, los, las versus le, les. Okay. So, if the verb uses the direct object, it has one meaning, and if it takes the indirect object, it has a different meaning. And all of this is idiomatic to Spanish. Therefore, it must be memorized. So therefore, that's why I think it can be confusing. But I think another reason it can be confusing is that it's not that easy always to define what is the definition of what is direct and what is indirect. Because the indirect object, when the object loses or gains something from the action, but that's culturally defined, right? I would think dead, to kill would be an indirect, because I think you lose a lot, you lose your life. But, it's lo maté, lo mató, okay? It can be confusing. But just like anything, once you get used to the language, what is common sense in Spanish and from outside looks crazy, as you eventually get used to the language, what looks crazy from the outside, as you get to know certain things about the language, begins to look quite normal. So I'll be back to continue with looking at direct and indirect objects. And so this is Coralla Fickler McLean at iStudyGuides.com. Thank you.